What's up guys, I'm BTC. A brand new patch just went live on PC and console. It introduces Baptiste and also a massive amount of nerfs and buffs. The biggest thing in the patch is the brand new character Baptiste. He is a main healer, but he also has a decent amount of mobility, utility, and damage. He's got quite a bit of everything. Now, this character hasn't been changed since it was on the PTR, outside of just some graphical changes to the way his ultimate looks. Everything else, the damage numbers, all that stuff has remained the same. Now, if you want to learn about Baptiste, I've already made 3 videos. There's a guide that will go over all of the different abilities, the stats, and also includes some tips and tricks. There's another video myth busting all of the interactions. It'll show you how everything works and how they interact with other characters and abilities. And the last thing is the Baptiste versus every hero, where I go through every single matchup in the game and show you where his strengths and weaknesses are. So if you want to learn about Baptiste, those 3 videos will teach you everything you need to know. You can find a link for them down below. Now let's talk about the buffs and nerfs. This patch has more hero balance changes than any other patch Blizzard has ever put out for the game. The first thing has to do with armor. So they changed the way that beam type and damage over time effects affect armor. For the beam type, damage is now reduced by 20% at a flat rate when hitting armor. So this is Mei, Moira, Symmetra, Winston, and Zarya. Whenever you attack armor, it simply removes 20% of whatever your damage is doing, as opposed to the normal rules for armor, where it would reduce it based, -5 or -3 after it got changed, and all that sort of stuff. So now it's just a flat -20% versus armor, which for most of these characters is effectively a damage buff. So you're going to be doing more damage versus armor because of this change. The other part is that damage over time effects are no longer mitigated by armor. There's no effect at all. For most of these, it's not really going to be a big deal. For example, Hanzo's Dragon Strike, you're just going to be dead anyways. That doesn't matter. Mei's Blizzard, Zarya's Graviton Surge don't really do enough damage to actually matter. Same thing with the Venom Mine. The things that are going to have a big impact, however, is Ashe's Dynamite and Moira's Biotic Orb. Those two are used frequently enough and do enough damage where this is going to have a pretty significant impact, and that is going to be a large buff to those 2 damage sources. There was a change to damage boosting where the effect now applies when the player attacks as opposed to when the attack lands. This isn't really going to affect almost anybody. You're not even going to notice it. The next thing is knockback. Knockback distance is now more consistent. Heroes that are flying can be knocked back and slowed. This just means that, remember how sometimes when Reinhardt would hit you and you would get moved like a foot to the side, and then other times you would get thrown like 10 meters off into the distance? That is no longer going to happen. It's now going to be a lot more consistent on how far you get pushed back for every single different attack and ability. Moving on to the character-specific changes, Ana, the Nano Boost, has been nerfed. Heal was reduced from 300 down to 250. This is a nerf to the character and to the ultimate. It's probably not going to change anything, for the simple fact that 250 is still enough to overheal almost every character in the game, and for the tanks that aren't going to get fully healed, then an extra heal or 2 is just going to bring them back up to full anyways, and because they have that damage resistance, it's still going to help. This is a nerf, it's not going to change anything. Doomfist got some buffs. Rising Uppercut and Seismic Slam cooldowns were reduced from 7 down to 6 seconds. This is definitely an increase in strength for the character, but it still doesn't make him even remotely as good as he was before, and even before, he was still a very problematic character. The main issue is that the reach or the Seismic Slam, the distance that you can travel, was nerfed so severely that it really limits what this character can do. So this is a buff, probably not going to change anything. Hanzo got a buff. Sonic Arrow detection radius increased from 7 to 9 meters. Not really much to say about this. Your Sonic Arrow is just going to have a bigger area now, and you can see more of the enemies. Junkrat got a buff and a nerf. His primary attack, the Frag Launcher, impact damage increased from 40 to 50. This is the impact only, so a direct hit. If it's area effect, the damage is unchanged. the Riptire cost increased by 10%. Now, they increased that as a result of him getting more direct impact damage, because the more damage you do, the faster you build your ult charge. But the way that this is going to turn out is overall, this is going to be a nerf to his Riptire, because you're not going to get that many direct hits. You're not going to have enough in order to compensate for that 10% increase. So overall, Junkrat is going to build his ultimate slower while dealing a little bit more damage to direct hits. Lucio got some pretty significant nerfs. This isn't going to change as much as people think though, and I'll explain that in a minute. The Amp It Up speed boost was reduced from 70 down to 50%. Crossfade regular speed was from 30 down to 20%. Sonic Amplifier can now get offensive assists. And the Wall Ride speed buff was increased from 20 to 40. This is so that Lucio moves just as fast as he used to, but the effect on all his teammates is reduced. Now, the reason for this was because of how good he is working with a Zarya and a Reinhardt and a Brigitte and some of those other characters, where you can just move everybody in. It's the Death Ball comp, essentially, when he just speed boosts everybody in. Now, the problem is that this doesn't really change a lot, because Lucio is still the only character in the game that can provide a speed boost. And even if that speed boost is an extra 10%, it's still going to be enough in order for that death ball to work, because the only thing that's required is that your team comp moves just as fast or faster than the other team comp. So if you can speed boost your team in, even if it was only 10%, it wouldn't matter, because that movement speed will still give you the advantage. And the problem is not that Lucio gives the movement speed, it's that he's the only character that gives movement speed. So if they had other characters that could do a similar function, then it wouldn't be an issue, and you could possibly have other characters and swapping out and all that sort of deal. But because Lucio is the only one that does this, he's the only one that provides speed boost, it's still going to be effective because of just how powerful that speed boost is. Whether it's at 50% or 30% or 20%, it doesn't matter. It's still a speed boost. It's still unbelievably powerful, because in Overwatch, mobility is king. Next is McCree. Fan the Hammer was nerfed, damage reduced from 55 to 50. Originally, they buffed it so that he would be stronger against tanks and armor, but since they just nerfed armor, they decided to revert this change as well. For his ultimate Deadeye, damage per second increased from 275 to 550 after locking onto targets for 1.5 seconds. This is not going to have any change for characters that have 200 hit points or less, but for the larger characters, the tanks, and the barriers, it's going to have a pretty significant change. You can now fully destroy a Reinhardt or Orisa barrier fairly easy with McCree's ultimate. So if you have just those extra couple seconds that might be provided by a Zarya bubble or a Baptiste immortality field, now you can do a massive amount of damage with the Deadeye. It might actually be good enough to be something used more than just a free reload. Next up is Mei. Her primary attack got a pretty significant damage increase, going from 45 damage per second up to 55. Now, this isn't going to change much when you have the combo. You can just freeze them, finish them off with the Icicle and a quick melee. This is more going to affect when you don't get to do that combo, when you're just doing damage and you're not able to freeze them and finish them off. Next up is the Ice Wall. The health was reduced from 500 to 400. This just makes it so that the enemy can now focus on the Ice Wall and destroy it a little bit faster, rather than having this almost nearly indestructible wall in between you. So it just gives incentive to attacking the wall now. Moira got a buff to the lingering heal over time effect that her primary heal has. The heal over time was increased from 3 to 4 seconds, and the total healing was increased from 50 to 65. Now, this means that she does heal for longer, but it's less per second. I'm not really sure how I feel about this change. Orisa, the fusion driver, her primary attack movement speed penalty was reduced from 50% down to 30%. Not much to say, this is just a flat buff to the character. You can now move faster while attacking. Next up is Farah. She got a slight buff to her attack. The minimum explosion damage increased from 16.25 up to 20. This doesn't change the total damage each attack does. It just means that when you're on the very outer edge of that area effect damage, you now take 20 instead of 16.25. So it's a minor buff to that outside damage. Next is Reaper. They nerfed his passive lifesteal from 50% down to 40%, but this is still higher than it originally was a little while ago. So this is not really going to have much of a change. Reaper is still going to be garbage in the upper bracket, and he's still probably going to be too strong in the lower bracket. This does nothing. Soldier got a couple of buffs. His primary attack damage went from 19 to 20, which might not seem like a lot, but because his rate of attack is so fast, it actually does seem to add up. The problem is that Goat's comp is the comp right now, and there's too many barriers, and he just can't really do what he needs to do. His tack visor is basically worthless in that situation. His sprint, the delay before you can fire the weapon using sprint, went from 0.5 to 0.3. Again, what might seem like a very, very minor change actually is pretty decent, and the tack visor can now target Riptire and Immortality Field, which is fine. It's a nice little buff and allows you to destroy those because the Immortality Field in particular was going to be problematic. But again, I'm not really sure how much Soldier is even going to get played because he's just completely unviable versus a Goat's comp. Sombra got some buffs, which are kind of more quality of life changes. The cooldown is reduced by half when hacking a health pack. This means that you just don't have to wait as long before engaging into the next fight. You can hack that large health pack, and then rather than waiting the full duration, you can just kind of go out a little bit sooner. And then also it changed the visual appearance to more indicate when something has been hacked. Not just the health pack, but a player as well. And this is just better for your team so that they know what target has been hacked. Next is Symmetra. She got a buff to her primary attack. It now ramps up 20% faster. This is just a flat buff to her damage potential. It makes that primary attack a little bit better. Next is Torbjorn. He got a pretty significant buff. The base health increased by 50 armor. As a consequence, his overload ability, the armor gain reduced from 150 to 100. So basically you get less from the ability, but it doesn't matter because you have a permanent 50 armor on the character. That is a huge buff. Widowmaker got a pretty significant nerf to her ultimate. Infrasight now reveals enemy health bars and is cancelled on death. To clarify, it still shows the enemies through the wall, but it also shows their health bars now. The whole purpose of this was because a Widowmaker could activate ult, and then it was global, and there was nothing the enemy could do to stop it. Like, it was just last until it expired. Now, they wanted to get rid of that, so they made it so you can kill the Widowmaker and then get rid of the ult, but they also wanted to balance it out and to give something better for the ultimate, and their idea was to show enemy health bars, which is absolute completely garbage and worthless. It doesn't even come remotely close to balancing out the now negative effect of this ultimate. So they removed a really important part, and they gave something that is just completely worthless. It doesn't balance it out. This is a massive, massive nerf to this ultimate. Next is Hammond. This is a massive buff to the character. Adaptive Shield no longer cancels roll mode, so you can now swing around in the enemies, you can activate that shield, and you don't have to lose your momentum. That is a huge, huge buff to the character. Next up is Zarya. She got a nerf to her alternate attack. The explosion radius was changed to a flat 2 meters regardless of energy level, where previously it would go from 2 to 3 meters depending on how much charge you had. So now it's just going to be 2 all the time no matter what. So this is overall an effective nerf to her damage potential. And lastly is Zenyatta, who effectively got a substantial nerf. His primary attack damage was increased from 46 to 48, which is almost inconsequential. Now, you might be wondering, well, that's a 2-point increase, whereas Soldier only got a 1 point, and his is really good. Why is Zenyatta's bad? It's because Soldier's rate of fire is so much better than Zenyatta that that extra 1 point of damage ends up being way, way better than the extra 2 that Zenyatta has. So that's why it's a difference, and this one is just worthless. It's almost a nothing change. And lastly, this is the really, really big thing though, is the Orb of Discord. The effect was reduced from 30% to 25%. That's a 5% damage reduction in the potential for this, and that means that not only Zenyatta, but everyone on your team will now be doing 5% less damage to whatever target is being hit by that Discord. Now, Discord is still going to be one of the best abilities in the game, but this is a substantial nerf to Zenyatta's damage potential and his effectiveness adding to the team. So that's all of the hero balance changes. Now, I'm sure people are going to be wondering, is this going to get rid of Goat's comp? I'm really not sure. There are so many changes here that it's really difficult to tell. It's going to require a lot of in-game testing from just coordinated teams in order to find out whether or not Goat's comp is going to be gone. I think what's going to happen is Goat's is still going to be around for at least a little while because that's what people are familiar with, and there's a possibility that some other comp may come out. But just looking at all of these changes, it doesn't immediately appear to me that anything is going to outright destroy Goat's comp. Even the changes to Lucio, even the changes to Zenyatta and Ana, they're still going to be very powerful, and it still feels like that Deathball Goat's comp with the tanks and the 3 supports is still going to be the best comp. Again, it's going to take some in-game testing from coordinated teams and scrims and whatnot to discover if there's a new combination. The thing is, even if something does cause GOAT's comp to kind of fall out of favor, it's not going away forever. It's still going to be around because it's still going to be an extremely powerful and viable strat on at least some of the maps. Maybe with these changes, it might be that it's not used on every map all the time, but it's still going to be used at least some of the time. And once again, if you want to learn more about Baptiste, those 3 videos I mentioned, the guide, the Mythbuster, and the versus all heroes, those videos will be linked down below, so go and check them out. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss anything. Also, come hang out in my Discord server and my Twitch live stream. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see what kind of cool VIP rewards you can get, check the links down below. And remember, always blame the controller because it's never your fault.